What is going on, Stephanie? How you doing?
Hello.
How you been?
Good, good. Hey.
Hey, so I'm so glad you can make it. It's been a long time since we got to sit down and have a chat.
I know. This is so cool. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Yeah, I know it's definitely a lot more work than people realize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot that goes on behind the scenes. But like I said, I really thank you so much for coming and joining us. So, and in a few words, why don't you tell everybody your name, where you come from, and what you do right now? Like, what are you doing right
Okay. My name is Stephanie Madison Schenck, and I am from small town in rural North Carolina. And currently, I am working on my PhD. The program is called Literacy, Language, and Culture. And my research interests include issues of second language acquisition, because I used to be a Spanish teacher and an ESL teacher. But more recently, I've shifted to issues of social justice in the language classroom and issues of language and power, and that type of thing. So that's what I'm up to now.
now? Awesome. So, what got you into studying language? When did you first know that that was something you wanted to get into?
Well, where I grew up, we had a Spanish teacher. We had a lesson once per week for maybe like half an hour or so, Senora McGinnis. And it was just very minimal exposure to languages. It's just kind of like a fun little extra that we did, like music class, PE, and Spanish once a week. But in high school is where I started, like most kids do with real Spanish classes. Our high school that at that time Spanish was the only foreign language you could take, so there I was, and I just really liked it. Like it was easy for me. I picked up on it, pretty quick. I didn't have to really work too hard at it. So then I thought, this could be a fun thing to major in college. It could be a good kind of skill to have, and could lead in other directions. For a while, I actually thought I was going to end up as a medical interpreter in a hospital, or
Mm-hmm.
like a legal interpreter in a courtroom. But I got my teaching license just in case I needed it, and of course, here we are.
Awesome, awesome. So, where did you get your undergrad from?
I went to college at Charleston in South Carolina, and then I did my master's at Appalachian State in North Carolina.
Awesome. So what was it like living in Charleston? Give everybody the rundown of a little bit of your experiences in Charleston because it's such a cool place.
Oh, I love Charleston so much. It is one of my very, very favorite places on earth. It's just got a really cool downtown. It's just the architecture, you can walk around forever. I mean, you could spend days and days just walking around looking at the houses, the mansions down by the Battery. I mean, it's just a pretty place to just be, but it's a fun place as well. There's always stuff to do. There's tons of restaurants, tons of bars, tons of music venues, and so there's always something fun to do. So I miss it terribly because I loved it so much. It's a great place.
I
Everybody
rem-
should consider coming to Charleston.
yeah, I remember when I was playing in a band and we played in Charleston and I think I can't remember what led to it, but I think we didn't have a place to stay or something. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wait, I think I know somebody that lives down here. And I called you and you were so sweet and you put us up for the night. And I think you fed
Yep.
us and just treated us very, very well. And it wasn't planned. So thank you. I don't think I've ever thanked you for that enough. So
Oh,
thank you
you're
again.
so welcome. It was so fun. My roommates were a little confused. They're like, why are there like 8 dudes like just sleeping on every surface in the house? I'm like, don't worry about it. They're cool.
Yeah, yeah. I played in an 8-piece band. We had a horn section and everything, and she was nice enough to put all of our broke butts up for the night. So I was very appreciative of that, and still am. So
Oh, that was fun.
yeah. So can you tell everybody what obstacles that maybe you came across, or anything that kind of hindered you when you're getting your undergrad?
Well, um, I will say that as a Spanish major, I mean, all majors have their own challenges, but with languages, it is so hard to get better, and that's frustrating. And the reason is it's a lot like music or anything else. It's like I think of it like a cone, right? Like you can learn a little bit and say like a little bit, and you're like, look at me moving up this cone of knowledge. But to get like better and better, you have to add more and more to it. It's no longer sufficient to add 10 phrases at a time like when you were a beginner. You have to add 100 phrases to like keep improving like in any measurable way.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really humbling because I as most people will tell you, study abroad is really where I like really got, felt like I was improving a great deal. But it's also humbling because you get there and you're like, oh, I don't know anything. I don't know any words. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm in over my head. But little by little, like everybody does, like you pick up, you adapt, and you learn, and that's how I learned Spanish.
So what happened right after your undergrad? Did you go directly to App, or did you go travel, or what happened after that?
Yeah, so in college, I spent time in Chile and in Costa Rica and in Mexico doing various study abroad programs. And then after I graduated from College of Charleston, I ended up teaching high school in Charleston for a little bit. After that, I spent a year in Madrid in Spain teaching at a bilingual elementary school as one of the English assistants. Then I moved back to the US and I taught in North Carolina for a few years and then South Carolina for a few years. And then I was like, you know what would be a great idea? Maybe I should just get a PhD. And so I just decided one day that was what I wanted to do. And that's so 10 years after I started teaching, that's where I ended up.
Hmm. So you said you traveled to, where was it? Mexico, Chile, and Costa?
In Costa Rica,
So which one did you go to first?
Chile.
Chile? What was that like?
Yeah. So I spent a full semester there, which I highly recommend. If you are going to study abroad for language purposes, a lot of American students like to just do the summer 4 to 6 weeks thing, and I definitely advise against that. I did the full 4 month semester. I wish I had stayed longer because it was super fun. It was really cool. Met all kind of interesting people. I mean, not just Chileans, but people from all over the world at the university where we were studying. We had Chilean professors, stayed with Chilean families, and it's easy to, and I'm sure you've seen this, you've lived abroad. It's easy for Americans to like group together and congregate together, but I tried really hard not to. I tried really hard to hang out with Chilean friends and Chilean students I met at the university and go to parties with people who didn't know any English at all. And so after all that, that's how I finally felt like I was like getting, my Spanish was pretty solid. It was just a really cool place. I mean, and it's just like in Europe, and like all people who travel know that it's easy to get from one country to the other. So we got to go to Argentina one weekend, and we went to Peru and to Machu Picchu, and that was it was super fun. Definitely recommend it. Yeah, had a great time. Would do it again in a heartbeat.
Awesome. How was the food?
Amazing, as
Yeah,
always.
I
It's like
heard.
the best part about traveling.
I saw. I saw. I think Chileans have like cowboys, right? Like,
Hmm.
and the meat there is ridiculous. Like they eat a lot of meat apparently
They eat a
there.
lot of meat. Yeah, they eat a lot of meat. They eat a lot of seafood as well, and like a lot of Central American countries as well. There are a lot of fresh vegetables every day, like fresh sliced avocado on toast every day, that type of stuff. So
Ooh,
it's really good.
ooh. This conversation might start leaning towards food. I'm getting hungry.
You fill up hours and hours.
I know. I'm telling you, that is the one thing I miss about traveling is the food. Like they just, not to say American food's not good, but comparatively, like the ease at which you can get food in other countries, like street food and stuff, is it's
Hmm.
abundant. Like that's one thing I miss the most. So where did you go after Chile?
So then I came back to College of Charleston, did another semester or two, and then I spent a summer in Costa Rica doing another program, picked up a couple more classes, couple more credits, and spending the summer in Costa Rica was fun. But it just wasn't enough time, like it was fun because by that point my Spanish was pretty solid, so I was able to understand a little bit more like linguistic complexity and nuance. And I was constantly like, hey, why did you say it that way? No, what was that? Say that again, write that down. And that's how I learned, if you ask for a glass of water in one country, you say it differently in another country. Or, foods all have different names in one country to the next. And slang, oh, you know how it is. Like, you saying, hey, dude, or hey, my man, in one country is a big insult in another country. And I learned that one the hard way as well. So I really liked it because I had more appreciation for the linguistic diversity. And then after that, came back to College of Charleston, did another, my final senior year, did my student teaching. And then after I graduated, I went and did a summer in Mexico, just to practice, basically, just to brush up. And loved Mexico. I stayed in Puebla, which is the home of, back to food, man. Mole poblano. If you've ever had mole poblano, it's like that spicy chocolate sauce that goes on like chicken and sesame seeds. And one of my friends, her host mother was a caterer who won the competition for the mole poblano competition of Puebla.
Wow.
I know, the things you remember, but that was a really important part of it. So yeah.
So can you? I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know if you remember, if you still keep up with it, but can you give us examples of maybe a similar phrase that that was said different in one country from the next, and say the name of the country and a little phrase?
Yeah. So definitely. So one example, when I was would illustrate this point, my Spanish class, I would always talk about being misunderstood and when people didn't know what you were saying. And so, for example, restaurants is where this happens quite a bit. So I was in Spain, and I was like, un vasito de agua de la llave, por favor, which is like a glass of tap water instead of bottled water. And they were like, ¿cómo? It's like un vasito de agua de la llave. Pues, ¿qué? And I was like, dude, like, agua que no viene en botella. And they were like, oh, agua del grifo. And I was like, oh, del grifo, okay. So I learned that there's another way to say like tap, like you turn the tap. Didn't know there was multiple ways to say it, but there you go. When the waiter in the restaurant acted like he didn't know what I was talking about, maybe he didn't, but he might have just been like snobby, I don't know. And you guys also have to be really careful with slang. In Chile, the word weon, it depends on your tone of voice when you say it, but typically it's used in conversation like, oye, ojón, ¿cómo estás? Like, hey, dude, what's up? Hey, man. But in Peru, when we were talking to our tour guide, his name was Freddie, we were like, oye, ojón, ¿cómo estás? And he was like, we don't say that here. It's like,
only we can say that. That's our word.
Are you ready?
That's funny. It reminds me of a similar story. So when I was in Thailand, I took Thai language classes at the one of the local universities there, and I spent, I can't remember how long it was, but a while, like going in and learning writing and speaking and culture and everything. And the day that I got my certificate and left, and I was so excited, I went to the local 7-Eleven and tried to speak, and they just look at me like, they give me that blank look like, what? And I don't know if I wasn't saying it properly, even though, I mean, because there's proper English and then there's English, everyday English. And I don't know if that was the difference. Maybe it was Thai that, like it wasn't normal street Thai language, but they gave me this blank expression, and I literally asked, I remember what it was. I asked for a hot dog. And so like, I was like, in Thai, I want a hot dog, and they don't have a Thai word for hot dog. So it was just hot dog. And they look at me blank. And then I was like, a hot dog. I want a hot dog. And they're like, huh? I'm like, a It's right there, a hot dog. And they're like, oh, hot dog? And I was like, yes, a hot dog. Like, it's just like they put intonations on it. And I was like, are you kidding me? I just spent all this time. I got the certificate. I can't even talk to the person at 7-Eleven asking for a hot dog. I was so upset. Yep. But that's funny.
It'll humble you real quick.
Real quick.
What it'll do. So just, if you're feeling real confident in your language abilities, just do a little traveling. Go to the grocery store. See what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think the issue that I found, I don't know if it was the same in like Latin America and that way, but in Asia, like when they saw my face, they were just like, oh, here's a a white boy or an American, and when you try to speak their language, they're not listening for that language. Mm-hmm. And so it was weird. It's like they weren't expecting you, so they're not listening for it, and then they just get even more confused. But anyway, so we'll move past my embarrassing moments in Thailand. So you came back and you taught in Charleston Spanish. Can you have any stories from that? Like any kids that you think you actually reached that maybe have pursued it from there?
Yeah. So over the years, kids will just kind of pop up every now and then with these little stories. It's like, oh God, I made a difference somewhere. And so one time, and this was a kid I taught in North Carolina. I had her for Spanish 1 and 2, Precious, love her so much. She graduated, went off to college, and she majored in biology or something, and she ended up minoring in Spanish. And so as part of that minor, she went to Peru for a semester. And when she came back, she like looked me up and was like, hey, Senora, let's go get a cup of coffee. I was like, sure. So we go. She had brought me like a little like llama she picked up in Peru. And she was telling me all about her adventures. And she said, and one of the things I did in my class for years and years and years was I did the phrase of the day, where we do like a memorized phrase every day. We practice it, we write it down. After we get to 10, we do a quiz on it. Like, you have to memorize these phrases. But at the end of the semester, you have 60 memorized phrases that you just like know off the top of your head. And so because she'd had me for 1 and 2, she had 120 of these phrases that I had like drilled into her head. And she was like, Senora, those saved me, because she's like, I would get in a taxi and I'd panic and I'd forget what to say. So she would just be like, que tengas un buen día. And he would be like, bueno, y tú también. And she's like, oh God, it worked, yes. And so she would rely on those phrases when she would like panic and get scared. And so she's like, man, I hated learning them, but I was so glad, because after that, like you get a little boost of like a little hit of confidence that you were understood. And then she could start like getting, a little bit more practice with her Spanish after that. But I thought that was precious. And she ended up actually coming as a guest speaker to my high school class that I was teaching at the time, and spoke to all my classes all day long, and just basically said, yeah, so I started out literally where you were, sitting in a chair in front of Senora Schenck. And now I'm graduated. I spent a whole semester abroad, and the stuff she taught me really worked. So that was a fun little full circle experience.
Awesome. Oh, by the way, AGH, one of our friends from Spain, said, just a fact, the word coger means to have intercourse in some places and to take in Spain, so be careful.
Well, and there's different degrees of like bad words, you know what I mean?
Oh,
like things that are really strong in some countries, like small children say them in other countries, and you don't know till you say it.
Yeah, I think in Thai it was a weird one, where it basically translates to "you are less than an animal," and that's like a really bad one. You wouldn't think like I don't know, swear words were always my favorites to learn first, just like most people, I reckon. It's one of the first things you learn. I remember
What
when
we
I was
learned first.
when I was in China, I had some taxi drivers just get out of the cars and basically yell out in Chinese, "F your mother," like at the other drivers, like really loud. And I was like, "Oh, what does that mean?" And they and they explained it to me. I was like, "Oh, I know something now." Like,
Getting out your little notepad. This is the
yeah.
one to go home and study.
Yep. Yep. All right. So back to your story. After you taught and traveled a little bit, you went and did your master's at Appalachian.
Yeah, while I was teaching high school, I did, night classes. They have a really good program for language teachers. Um, so you have classes at 5 o'clock at night, and takes about a year and a half, 2 years, and it was really good. I really loved that program and learned a ton. It was heavy on the Spanish literature, which was good because that helped me to maintain my Spanish, because that's always a challenge, when you're a teacher, like you stay in those low levels all day long, that it's easy to forget. So that was it was really good. I liked it a lot. Highly recommend.
And what was that master's in?
It's called Romance Languages, and my concentration was Spanish.
Okay, cool. So, did you have any obstacles that you had to overcome in the masters, or was it just fairly straightforward?
The masters, I will tell you, the best part is having good classmates and good colleagues to work with, because it's exhausting. I mean, anybody who's been a teacher knows that teaching is exhausting and it's draining, and you don't want to go, and you don't want to do your reading, and you don't want to write these papers, and you don't want to struggle through short stories and novels in Spanish. But if you know that your classmates are going to be there waiting for you, it's like, okay, well, at least I'll get to go and like hang out with my buddies a little bit. And so that was good when you just feel tired. And that's just a universal, I mean, that's just part and parcel of being a teacher. Like, it's an emotionally draining job, even if nothing bad happens that day. It's just you're on all day long. Ton of energy goes into it. So I think just having buddies to help pull you along when you feel too tired to to do it. So that helped a lot.
So what happened immediately after you received your master's degree?
So after that, I always like to have like my teaching job and then like a side hustle of some sort. So for a few years, it was my master's. But after I finished it, I thought, well, I kind of want to put my time into something else. And so I started teaching night ESL classes, which is English for speakers of other languages. And I did that at a community college. This community college basically had like rolling enrollment. People could come and join at any time. And I taught the basic level English classes for adults from other countries. And it was incredibly fun, incredibly rewarding. They were the nicest students I have ever taught, and I've taught in like a bilingual preschool, like all the way up to this adult classroom. My oldest student was 80 years old. And these adult students were they're so fun. They're so fun to be around. They try really hard. They put forth a lot of effort. It's opposite from the teenagers who roll their eyes like, oh, we gotta do this work. They were like, okay, let's do this work. I'm here to learn. I'm here to get this concept down pat. Like, we're going to practice it. And they were just really dedicated. And that changes like the whole atmosphere of a class. So after I finished my master's, that's what I did with my evenings, is I started teaching night ESL classes at a community college. And it's still one of my favorite things I've ever done. Incredibly rewarding.
How long did you do that?
Did that for about a year or two. And then after that, I moved to South Carolina, where I started because I always have to have something. I did my national board certification, which if you're not familiar with national boards, it's basically like an additional kind of licensure you can add to your teaching license. But it's an incredibly rigorous program. It's almost like the amount of work I put into my master's. Like, it's a lot of hours that you put into it, but did that program, got that certification. And then when I ran out of other things, started my PhD.
So you said you worked with kids in preschool all the way up to adults.
Mhm.
How are preschool? How is teaching preschool kids a second language? How does that?
Oh God. Okay. So I've done it in a couple of different places, but my favorite was in Spain when I taught at that elementary school. In Spain, they start public school at age 3. So you have the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds are like in a separate wing, and then like the 5, 6, the regular elementary kids. So I had a class of 3-year-olds, and they are hilarious. I mean, it's like wrangling cats. They're so funny, but they can mimic you so precisely, and it's wild. Like one time, so I was English teacher of these little, Spanish kids. I had this little boy, and he had like a block in his hand, and he was about to like throw it at this girl, and I was like, "Hey, don't even think about it." And he goes, "Think about it. Think about it." And I, of course, like immediately like drop my stern teacher voice and just die laughing. And so the rest of the year he'd be like, "Hey, Stephanie, think about it." So
That's
so
awesome.
you have to be careful because their pronunciation is like it's like weirdly spot on. So there it's and I had help, like I wasn't the only teacher in the room. So but it's fun. They're super cute, but they are they're a handful.
Yeah, I got a 2-year-old now, and I've been trying to help get chat to help me out with my potty mouth. So because it's getting to be that point in time where he's starting to pick stuff up pretty quickly. So I'm having to rein in my potty mouth here recently. But that's awesome. So you've taught preschool, and you've what other age groups in between? I know the adults and high
Yeah.
school. Did you do
Yeah.
like
So
elementary, middle?
yeah. So, and I taught preschool in Charleston as well as like a part-time job when I was a college student. They had it was a really cool program. It was a church that had ESL classes for adults for free, but then they had a preschool for those kids. So it was kind of like an ESL preschool kind of a thing
Hmm.
where we would help the kids, like we would practice vocabulary, play with them, try to introduce them to some new words, speak Spanish with them sometimes. So that was my other preschool like experience. Then in Madrid I also I taught ages 3, 5, and 6. Those are my ages that I taught. um, I taught middle school for my student teaching to get my license. So I did that for a semester in Charleston, and I really loved middle school. I was nervous. I was like, I hate this, but they were really fun. I liked them. I had 7th and 8th grade, and then I taught high school, 9 through 12, just a mix of all the grades. Did that for 10 years, and now and so then I taught adult ESL, which is anything from 18 to 80. Big range. And currently, I'm teaching literacy classes at the university. So those are kids, well, young adults who are about 20 or so years of age.
Hmm.
All of them.
So how was where are you doing your doctorate again?
Clemson University.
I'll forgive you for that one. So how's it going so far? How far are you in?
Yeah, so it's going well. I did the path a little bit non-traditionally. Um, so my first 2 years, I was a part-time student at Clemson, and so I was still teaching high school full time. So what I would do is I would teach my high school classes. I would request fourth block plan, and then I would leave school early and drive the 2 hours to Clemson to take a night class from 5 to 8, and then I would drive home and go to work the next day. And I did
Wow.
that for a couple of reasons. In academia, you have things called assistantships, which I knew literally nothing about at all. And so, what an assistantship is, it's basically a part time job. It pays very little, usually between $10,000 and $20,000 a year, but they also cover your tuition and your health insurance.
Whoa.
So, it's not a bad gig. So when I got accepted, they didn't have any assistantships open because the program was really new and they just didn't have a lot of money. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll just pay for one class at a time until one comes open. So I did that for 2 years. And then after that, I finally was like, okay, I'm just gonna bite the bullet. Got an assistantship and have been there. This will be my third full time year. So when all said and done, it will have taken me 5 years, 2 part time and 3 full time. I'm currently at the stage called ABD, which is all but dissertation. That's when you've done all of your classes, you've done comprehensive exams, you've done your dissertation proposal to get permission to do your dissertation. You have to do like a formal presentation and say, this is what I want to study, this is my plan, this is my timeline, and you have to get like official permission and turn in the paperwork. Then you can do your study and do your dissertation, and that's all I have left. Just one thing, just the dissertation.
So what is your dissertation on?
So my dissertation, a little bit of background information about my study is I actually changed topics halfway through my program, which is not recommended because the goal is for all of your coursework, like all of your papers should be geared towards your dissertation so that way you have all this background knowledge by the time you sit down and do it. So I came in wanting to do writing, second language writing, and how if you can help your students write more clearly, it'll help them speak more clearly. That was like my thing. But like I said, I was still teaching high school while doing classes. And so that I was still teaching high school during the 2016 election. And it had an immediate impact on my class. The very next day, I will never forget this. The very next day after the election, like as soon as the bell rang, come into class, close the door, get ready to start the class. A girl walks in wearing a red MAGA, Make America Great Again hoodie. Mm-hmm. It's in the front row. And she's like, hey, Senora, we ain't got to take your class no more. And I was like, baby, why on earth would you think you're not taking Spanish 1 anymore? What are you talking about? She's like, well, Trump's president now, so all the Mexicans are going to get kicked out and we're allowed to speak English again. And I was like, okay. So 3 seats behind her was a kid who was a Mexican kid. His parents are from Mexico. His parents didn't speak English. Precious kid, precious family. And he's just sitting there, like, looking down at his desk, like, listening to all this. And he's just, like, looking down at his desk. And I was, like, watching this happen. And it was, like, an out-of-body experience. I didn't know what to do, So I handled it poorly in the moment. I was like, just get your homework out on your desk. Like, we're not talking about this. But little by little, those incidents kept happening, like, over and over again. Comments would pop up that would mimic what was going on, like, in politics. And so basically, because of that, I changed my whole dissertation focus to how sociopolitical hostility impacts students and teachers, and what particularly foreign language teachers do in response, particularly if you have immigrant students in your class mixed in with American students. What do you do? I mean, hopefully don't botch it as poorly as I did when that first happened. But over the year, that last school year, I developed some strategies to address it. And my whole study is, well, what do other people do? Like, how much is this a problem to other people? And how are teachers handling this? That's
so
my study.
How do you handle something like that? That's like an uphill battle, it seems. I can't even think of a proper way to squash something like that, because no matter what the politics are going on outside of the classroom, all that has to be left at the door. It's about education. It's about learning at that point in time, right? Like, I don't know what would be the best way.
So there's this idea of neutrality, right? Teachers are like, I am here to be neutral. So if a kid says, like, one of the common, I've been doing a lot of reading about, reports about how this has affected kids. And, like, let's say, for example, you have some students handing out fake deportation papers to your Hispanic students, right? This is common.
Has that happened?
Oh, yeah. Like,
oh, geez.
Yeah. So this is like a common thing. And so that's really traumatic, obviously, for the kid on the receiving end of that. As a teacher, neutrality, if you just don't say anything about it, it actually kind of empowers the bully.
Mm-hmm.
You're not protecting the kid who was being mistreated, so neutrality is a thing that we all, like, as teachers, think is the best stance to take. But I don't think it is. So what I started doing little by little, as I kind of like developed strategies, is I started out with questioning, and just acting just completely like ignorant. So
Mm-hmm.
when kids would bring up things like, well, these illegals are just pouring over the border and they're going to steal everybody's job because that's all they do, I would just be like, stop everything, halt my lesson, and I'd be like, that happened to you? Did you apply for a job and a Hispanic person got it? Like, well, no. Like, did it happen to your dad? Well, I mean, no. Oh, so anybody like in your life? Well, I mean, no, not really. And I'm like, so this is like a fantasy problem that you're scared of because it's not like really a thing, right? And they'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I mean, and it just kind of short circuiting that whole unexamined thought. Now, did I change anybody's mind? Mhm. But at least I was able to short circuit that. Have you even thought about what you're saying? Like, just paused for a little
Right.
bit. So the questioning was good. That was pretty effective because it would basically just make them freeze for a second. Another thing I like to do, it's called, I have since learned, it has an academic name. It's called a counter narrative, where you offer up other stories and other perspectives. So, for example, if a kid said, like we talked a lot about farm workers' rights, and like Cesar Chavez, he's the one, the Si Se Puede, he's the one, the Yes We Can campaign slogan of Obama. He got that from Cesar Chavez, who was a farm workers' rights advocate, like in the 70s, 60s. So we read a lot about him. And so when students would say things about, well, we should deport all these farm workers, we should go round them all up, we should go, just get buses and get them out of here, I would say, well, that's interesting that you bring that up because that happened. We've done that in like the
Mm-hmm.
60s and 70s. We did that, and miles of crops rotted in the fields, and farmers lost millions of dollars because all this food rotted because we rounded up all the workers. We did that as Americans, so we've tried that tactic. So history tells us that that's not a good thing to do. And I just kind of offer like another like perspective to kind of say, well, that's an interesting take that I can, well, let's examine that. So just offering another way of thinking about it, about the ramifications, who it would impact, those types of things, to again, just not change anybody's mind, but get kids thinking about things that
And
they've never really considered before.
yeah, that's and I think a lot of the fear that's being um, pushed out by the current administration is and a lot of and the reason why most people are just absorbing this is a lack of education in those particular topics. So if you're encouraging your kids to investigate before you jump to conclusions, you actually may change minds for the better. And like um, that's what I see. A lot of this, people are afraid of not just what they don't understand, but what they don't know. Period. And so if you give them an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper about that topic, and they're like, wait a minute, that's not true or fake news. It's
Mhm.
it's I think that's a
Yeah.
very uh, intelligent and strong tactic to use. It's brilliant. I like that. Anything else?
Well, yeah, that's the study. I mean, I'll report back in 6 months' time and see what teachers coast to coast, especially foreign language teachers. I always say my classroom was hijacked when the 2016 election happened, right? Like, this rhetoric came to me. I didn't start all this. It came to me. And so teachers nationwide, especially language teachers who are supposed to be about learning a language so you can learn about people and you can learn about other cultures and other ways of being, and how diversity is a great thing because you learn perspectives you never considered before. If that is what like we as a profession stand for, we should have a role in combating this hostility. So I'll tell you what I find out. We'll see
Well,
what people are doing.
well, I'm definitely gonna have you back on, Steph, for sure.
Okay.
After that's all said and done. All right, so moving on.
Mhm.
After you've done some volunteer work during this period of time, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I always say like I'm just fortunate that I stumble upon good people. I cross paths with good people who have set me up with a lot of really cool just volunteer and service opportunities where I could put what I know. I mean, I always say I'm good at like three things, and one of the three things I'm good at is teaching. So I've stumbled in some good opportunities to put my skills to use. So
So
yeah.
so wait. What are the three things? So it's kickboxing. It's kickboxing.
Kickboxing, right? No, yeah. I always joke like I have a talent. I can talk to anybody about any topic for any period of time. And my husband would say incessantly, because which is very rude, but that's one of my talents. I feel like I can teach anything to anybody. And yeah, obviously kickboxing. So
So don't mess with Steph, guys. Is what I'm saying.
right.
Anyway, so can you go in a little detail, like where have you volunteered and provided your one of three things?
Now one of three things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did in college was when I studied in Chile. I'm one of the guys that I met. He um, was part of this kind of just grassroots volunteer group that was affiliated with one of the Catholic hospitals. And what they would do on Friday nights between like 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., so the middle of the night, they would go out in this little ambulance type of van thing with a volunteer doctor, volunteer nurse, every now and then a dentist, a couple of volunteers, and then volunteers like me who I can help you with nothing medical, but volunteers like me to go out into these communities where basically homeless people lived and had set up basically kind of like houses made out of cardboard, corrugated metal, that type of thing. So these um, areas where homeless people had formed communities, we would go out there and we would just wake them up in the middle of the night and be like, "Hi, are you hurt? Are you sick? Is anybody here hurt? Is anybody here sick? We have a doctor." And so they would go and wake each other up. And my job, because again, not a medical professional, is I would help, line people up, get the paperwork, talk to them in line, go out, wake people up, gather people, that type of thing. And so that was a really cool thing to do because it was truly eye opening in a way. Because I mean, I've seen homeless people before. You know what I mean? Like I've been to cities,
Yeah.
even though I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Like I've seen it, but the shelters they constructed for themselves in the outskirts of Santiago was like nothing I'd ever seen. So we did that every Friday for the whole semester, and so it was it basically taught me a lot of things, but it also taught me that it's not hard to give up a Friday night of partying because like you can party Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you can party any night. But when an opportunity comes your way, like my just philosophy of life is like, let's go, let's take it, let's do that thing. So that was one of the first things I had done to put my Spanish to work in a positive way.
Hmm.
Yes, that was the first thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What happened? What's another thing that you've done?
Recently, there's been a couple of things I've been working on recently. So a professor of mine, he has ties with an organization in Tanzania, and he was like, "Steph, I think this is an organization that you would like to be involved with." And I was like, "Okay, buddy, we need a timeout. Spanish teacher here, okay?" So My Swahili is minimal. And so he laughed and he said, no, here's the situation. In Tanzania, which is in East Africa, I didn't even know where it was, it's East Africa. The students in high school are required by law to be taught in English and be tested in English. And these tests determine whether or not you can get into a university. And so the problem is a lot of the teachers don't speak English that well, nor do they know how to teach in English because they have to get the content as well as the English like vocabulary and grammar that goes with that content. So it's a lot to ask of these teachers.
Right.
So yeah, the program basically brings in, people like me who are, language teachers and says, okay, well, you've got this task. Here are some strategies you can use. And so we do a week-long workshop with these high school teachers and just basically go through a series of different things that you can do in class to teach both English and the content in ways that they hadn't considered. It's a cool program too because they track those teachers, and the teachers who've been through that training, the kids score better. And of course, life isn't about test scores, but these test scores have real ramifications. So you have to take it seriously. And so that was the thing I've done for the past couple of summers. So that was a really cool thing.
What's the biggest takeaway you think from going out to Tanzania and experiencing what it's like with the people that live there?
What I learned in Tanzania is the way developing countries live is similar kind of globally. I mean, whether you're in Nicaragua, whether you're in, Central American countries that have areas that are still struggling, it's pretty universal because there is some pretty dire poverty that is shocking if you've never like witnessed it before. But I hate, like, this is a terrible outlook. I hate to say that my reaction was, yeah, I mean, that looks familiar. Yeah, like I've seen homes like that in many places. Like, yeah, that's familiar to me. But what I learned from them was how teachers are teachers no matter where you go. That's another universal truth is you can laugh about the dumb things your kids say in class that you just cracked up and you couldn't keep a straight face, and you'll talk about the kids that you worry about, and you'll talk about how much work you have to bring home and how tired you are. So all these universal truths about teachers, they hold true. So they were super fun to work with. They were a great group. So I really loved working with them.
Awesome. Have you done any other volunteer work?
Yeah, and the thing I've been working on most recently in the past probably 2 years is immigrant detention centers.
Ooh.
Which, this is it's different than the camps that you see in the news along the border, but they're kind of funneled in the same system. So what has been happening in recent years, let me back up, is when someone presents themselves to the border and says, here is my paperwork, I would like to ask for asylum, please. Instead of processing them right there and getting them into the country to deal with them at a court date down the road, what's been happening is they put them on a bus and they ship them to basically a prison or a camp because the prisons are like overflowing. So this prison, basically, there's one in Georgia that I've been going to for the past couple of years to do humanitarian visits. And so what that means is you just go and there's like an organization, like it's called El Refugio, which means the refuge. This organization gets calls from family members, sisters, brothers, and they say, look, I have my husband's in this detention center, my brother's in this detention center, we can't come, can somebody please just go check on him? So that's where we come in, the volunteers, and you go and it's just like a prison you would see like on TV. Like you go through, there's like the glass, you talk on the phone, and you just meet with this person that you've never met before. And they're considered humanitarian visits because we ask them, how are you being treated? How are you being fed? Do you need medical care? Have you been put in solitary for any reason? And you basically just try to get information to see what human rights abuses are happening, so you can report back out. What I like to do, because again, good at three things, talk to anybody about anything for any period of time. I'm always paired with a Spanish speaking man because that's a language, skill that I have. So I'll
Hmm.
talk to the Spanish speaking guy and I'll just, try to raise his spirits. Like if I can get them to laugh or like crack a smile, I'm like, yes, yes, like, because it's awful, like you could really just sit there and just like cry, like it's terrible. So I've been working on that. And with that work, a professor friend of mine, he and I are trying to get ESL services into this detention center,
Hmm.
and poetry classes and literacy services and that type of thing.
Hmm.
Honestly, for a couple of reasons. Every time I sit down with one of those guys, I'm like, what would you need? What would be beneficial? And they're like, we just wish we knew English because we don't know what the guards are saying. We don't know what the legal proceedings are like. Like we don't know anything because we don't know English. Like, is there any way you could send me a book to learn English? And I'm always like, that's not how it works. But I mean, I would if I could. So we want ESL services, but poetry workshops and literacy workshops, to me, to offer kind of a restoration of human dignity. To me, it's more important that we just have a space where we can not be through a piece of glass and just like sit down with these guys and be like, look, people are watching what's happening. Like, I know it feels like you're all alone, but like, this is a way for you to put like pen to paper and get a story out. So um, we're it's a long process. You have to submit your paperwork to ICE. Like I had to submit to ICE to get approval. And I don't know if I'm going to get approval or not. So
Well, don't they know about your one thing, Steph? Come on.
I know, right? God.
Oh, that's
So
so you have to submit paperwork and
mhm. Well,
any
that's where we're at
indication of how
now. We've
long that
submitted and
takes?
we're waiting. Yeah, we're waiting.
Huh. Alexa just chimed in. I don't know what that was about. Thanks,
Mm.
Amazon. Uh, that's insane. So, I mean, can you describe a little bit more in detail what you have learned from that? Like what kind of conditions they are in?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, as heartbreaking as it sounds, I imagine.
It's yeah. It's taught me that it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like the more like awful people behave, like other people step up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like El Refugio is like kind of the driving force behind this. And basically, there's a documentary you should watch. It's called Lumpkin, because this is in literally Lumpkin, Georgia. That's actually the name of the town.
Hmm.
There's this, that is where El Refugio, the little organization, exists, as well as Stewart Detention Center.
Mm-hmm.
And the people at Refugio, they do such incredible work. They have a hospitality house, which Samantha Bee, if you know the show Full Frontal with Samantha Bee,
Mm-hmm.
she gifted them a new house over Christmas. And
Wow.
so because she had like gotten wind of this, and their old house was just like basically like a trailer. It was like tiny. Well, they have this new house and they basically host families when families come down to visit their loved ones at Stewart Detention Center.
Cool.
What I've learned from these people at Refugio who do this work is how the detention center is where it's at by design. It's hours from anywhere, like it's just in the middle of nowhere. It's the one of the largest immigrant detention centers in the country, but they have, I mean, I think it's like 95% of the guys there get deported because they don't have access to lawyers because they're in the middle of nowhere. They also don't have access to visitors because families can't always afford to go down there because they're down one worker because their husband, their boyfriend, their son is locked up, and they're stretched financially, and so they can't always go down there and make that long journey either. So I've learned a lot from them about when things seem awful, like there's something you can still do. So that is one good thing, is that there are people who are still just chipping away with like whatever you can do to make it less awful. The other thing I've learned from these guys is that they don't know how much people are following this story. For example, One of the times I went down recently, there was a guy I was talking to. He was from Cuba, and I had to wait 5 hours to meet with him. And at Stewart, what that means is you're in a waiting room with plastic chairs. You're not allowed to leave. There's no bathroom. You can't have water. You can't have a phone. You can't have a book. And so I literally just sat there for 5 hours. Luckily, I can talk to anybody. So as people came and went, like I made friends in the waiting room. But the reason I had to wait for 5 hours was the guy I was scheduled to meet with was participating in a hunger strike. And according to ICE rules, if you're in a hunger strike, you're in solitary confinement. So I had to wait for him to get taken out of solitary confinement because he had decided to break the hunger fast that day. So he went straight from the hunger fast for a week to meet with me. And he was hot. Like he was just like, I cannot believe they would have let me die in there. Like nobody cared. Nobody cared. They didn't ask. Him and a group of guys were participating in this. He's like, they didn't ask why. And I was like, well, why were you? He said, because nobody will tell us anything. We've been here for months. Are we going to get a court date? Do we get a lawyer? Do I live here now? Am I ever going to get out? Like nobody would tell him anything. And that was literally the only thing that they wanted was information. So I learned from that experience what happens if you try to protest, what happens if you use the only tool you have in like a hunger strike. You go to solitary and you're ignored. So what I told that guy was, I was like, he's like, nobody cares, nobody cares. And I was like, well, yeah, I can see how you would think that, but I want you to know that I care and my friends care. So I am going to go tell people your story for you if that's okay. And he was like, absolutely. I want people to know, like, this isn't fair. Like, nobody's helping us. And he's like, I'm not trying to do anything wrong. I gave them my passport when I got here. Like, I presented myself how you're, like, I followed your laws. And this is where I'm at. And so I was like, dude, I hear what you're saying, but I like to say, like, I use like my white privilege and my citizenship privilege as a shield. So his face and his name doesn't have like a target on his back. I'll tell his story for him to serve as a shield so he doesn't have to like expose himself like that. But those are the types of stories that you hear. And I always ask, like, do you care if I tell people about this? And I was like, yes, somebody needs to know. So just it's really eye-opening how just broken these men are. And I mean, this is the only place I've been to because it's the one that's like just geographically closer. The women's detention centers are even worse, obvious reasons. And I mean, not even we now have child detention centers. But
That's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even. It's hard. I don't even. It takes a person like you because I mean, that would just break me down, especially the kids. The kids one. That sounds. I don't even. Yeah, that's a rough thing, and reality, man. It sets in every once in a while. You know, it makes you reflect on certain things. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to respond to that one, Steph.
Well, I always think about like languages because I'm a language person. To me, it's not just the learning of another language, but how you can put it to work. And so I just think it's like my own little like way of like putting my little skills to work, putting my Spanish to work. So
do you have to speak Spanish to volunteer with this organization?
No, it's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of the guys there speak English because a lot of the guys have been here for years and years and years. They have kids who are citizens. So a lot of them speak English. So like if you, for example, wanted to come with me next time, you can just come on. And you would be paired with an English speaking person. But they are always seeking people who speak languages from all over the world. There's a ton of men from Africa, and of course there are just hundreds of African languages. There are people who, like, we have a French-speaking friend, and she's been paired with a guy from Africa. People from different, just all over, Indian languages, just people from all over the world. And so if you put on your form the languages that you speak, they will find you somebody who speaks that language. and put you to work in that way.
Can you do you know the website for that organization so I can share it in chat for those that might want to take a look?
Yeah, it's called, and let me make sure I say it right. Refugio Stewart, is that it? .org. Yeah, it's elrefugiostewart.org because Stewart is the name of the detention center, and Refugio is REFUGIO.
Sorry, can you spell the whole thing out for me?
Yeah, ELREFUGIOSTEWART.org.
All right, I'll throw that in chat in case any of you guys want to go check out this organization who sounds like they're doing wonderful work.
Yeah, they're cool. They're cool people.
That's great. So in your own personal opinion, from what you've seen, what do you think a solution could be?
Right. So I think the problem, everybody is really fixated on, are they legal? But are they legal? We hate the illegals. Like, it's like this fixation. And I'm like, what's funny about laws is we write them as human beings. Like, it's not like a law of nature that can't be changed. So the first thing, if I was, queen of the world, the first thing I would do would be
wait. You're not queen of the world?
I mean, not yet. I'm
okay.
like this close. Like, I'm a young sprite yet, but yeah. Well, what I would do, the first thing would be guest visas, like guest worker visas, because if our problem, that we set our problem, I mean, it's a little deeper than this, is that they're not legal, their paperwork isn't in order, then let's give them paperwork. I mean, that solves like 90% of the problem. So I would do a much more streamlined guest worker visa for the migrant workers who pick the food that is on our table, for the people who work in the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, all these people who are working right now. I mean, our economy would collapse if every single one of these people was like zapped off of our country. So I would take them out of the shadows and streamline our worker visa program. And the other thing I would do is with asylum seekers, I would take all of the billions of dollars we're putting into these tent cities and camps and immigrant detention centers. Oh, because fun fact, your tax dollars pay for that. So I would take all that money and I would hire just hundreds of caseworkers to just sit along the border, and we're going to build us a building there. And so that way we put asylum seekers in a chair and a desk in front of a caseworker instead of into a bed where we pay $700 a night on our tax dollar dime. So I would completely shift how the paperwork process worked, because that's really all it is. It's maddening to hear people say all the turmoil they went through to get their paperwork in order, and they finally go to get to the office to get their paperwork finalized, and it's literally like the click of a mouse. It's like, okay, there you go, now you're legally here. So the paperwork process needs to be completely just redone so people don't have to live in the shadows, would be what I would do.
That's very reasonable. It sounds, yeah. Mrs. Common, who's in chat right now, says, make Stephanie queen of the world. I'm with her. I agree.
I'd be great at it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I know that we're all thankful for people like you who donate their time and effort and skills into helping. I mean, at the end of it's just being a good person, and helping others when you can. And I don't think you see that enough. And it's kind of the reason I want to do this show. And I'm really glad to have you on, and I'm really happy that you're doing what you're doing. We need more people like you, period.
So I know I said I wouldn't get too political, but
I mean,
here we are.
It's hard. It's hard. And, I was watching, I in my opinion, and I don't take either side really, but I mean, I do. I mean, I know what's wrong and what's right. It doesn't take a genius to figure this out. It just takes a little effort on your part to do your due diligence, period. Right? I mean, it's not that complicated.
Mhm.
Just be a good person. But at the end of the day, I think the tools that we are using, social media platforms, most modern technology, it's it was designed, at least the people who invented this stuff wanted this to bring people together um, when people have figured out how to manipulate the system, all it's doing is tearing people apart. And I think
Yep.
a lot of people forget that there's so much common ground that they take these radical um, points of view, and they lean towards that, because they're not getting the whole picture. And it really, and I hate to say it like this, but it's kind of laziness on their part. They're not they're not doing their due diligence and researching topics, and they're just getting their information from untrustworthy sources, and that's a huge problem. And I think that it definitely needs to be resolved, or else it's gonna only get worse. Because people, you can say, oh, it can't get any worse. It will get worse. um, it History has a tendency to repeat itself. And I mean, not going too deep, but if you just look back, I mean, not even just 30 years, if you look back, you can see this swing of things is happening again. But it seems like it's like a pendulum, and it just keeps getting higher towards one way or another, It's, people just, they don't consider that there's common ground between everything. And it's like, you can't have a stance on one thing and a family member on another. And now it's breaking up families, and people are getting mad at, it's just getting out of hand. We just need to rein it in a little bit. But thank you so much. Let's jump right into Q&A. I've got so many questions for you, Steph. You're
Oh, I can't
definitely
wait.
the first guest that I've gotten this many questions. But let me start off. I don't know who this is from. I didn't get the names, but I'll just spit it out. Has anyone told you to speak Spanish with them in an English accent?
Oh no. What's funny is when I speak Spanish, my accent is a mix of Chilean and Mexican and Costa Rican and Spain, because those are the places I've lived. So
Mm.
when I speak Spanish, my Spanish accent, it depends on who I'm talking to as to which one like comes out more. But the first thing people ask me is like, "Wait, where are you from?" Because it doesn't sound like an American English or Spanish accent.
So you think you've nailed the accent down to where, like, they wouldn't quite know you're American unless you.
Till I mess up linguistically, then they're
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, you gave yourself away." But yeah, I can at least confuse people for a little bit. So I'm gonna call that a win.
Okay, cool. Okay, next one. Did you have any pushback from your family and friends when it came to your major choice? This person says, I used to work with humanity majors, and they were constantly told you must major in STEM.
Mm. So my parents just wanted me to have basically an idea of what I wanted to do with my college degree, and so my teaching license, I would just got it as a backup because I thought I was going to go into interpreting. But I ended up using it, ended up, following the education path all this time. And so they really weren't too worried about my major so long as it was something that like I had my eye on the prize of having a job when I got done. That was what they cared about. If they had wanted me to go into STEM, they would be very disappointed because I'm not very good at math and I am super squeamish, and so I could never go into medicine. So I think they were just like, oh, "This is the best we can hope for our little squeamish one."
Um,
So yeah, not too much trouble.
cool. Uh, do you think it is essential to go to the country of the language you are learning? Uh,
I say yes. And the reason I say yes is because I believe a language is so much more than just, words and grammar, vocabulary and grammar. To me, a language is representative of the people. It's like it's a reflection of the people who speak it. So if you learn it out away from the people who speak it, you're only getting part of it. Like you're getting the linguistic skills, but it's like I said earlier, like to what end, for what purpose, like as a party trick. I mean, yeah, to be fair, I can say like 10 phrases in like 10 different languages, and that is a great party trick. However, I use those phrases as like an olive branch when I meet somebody new, or I use it as like a way to like connect with people. Like one time, I had an Uber driver who was from Tanzania, and I was like, "No way!" I was like, mimi ongea Kiswahili kidogo," which means I speak a little Swahili. And let me tell you, like he just cackled, like he laughed so hard. So I think that if you view language the way I do, is that it's you use it for a purpose, and that's to like get to know people and be around people. Then yeah, absolutely, as much time as you can possibly spend in that country, I say yes.
Awesome. Okay, next, was it easy to obtain your ESL certification?
Yeah, so for me to teach community college, I didn't have to have an ESL certification because my master's was in languages, and I had taken enough language teaching classes that my Romance languages and Spanish degree counted. And then when I went to Spain, that my bachelor's in Spanish counted because I had a teaching license in the U.S. So I haven't done, and actually I'm not ESL certified for K-12 here in the U.S. I could get that add-on, but I just haven't done it. So for community college, you can actually have an assortment of degrees that count.
Cool.
Yeah.
What do you do to keep your Spanish level, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because now that I'm in this literacy program, I speak English all the time. I like to watch shows on Netflix to practice, and what I like to do is like put it in Spanish subtitles so that way I can like practice reading it while I'm listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, I've been watching a show called Casa de Papel. It's about these robbers who steal like $1 billion
Is
euro
that,
from the Bank of Spain.
is that
It's a
House of
fun.
Paper?
Yeah, exactly. Casa de Papel, and or it's called Money Heist in English.
Uh-huh.
So I watch shows like that. I also try like going to Stewart, for example. That is a big motivator to not lose my Spanish. So I try to practice with friends any chance I get, listen to music. But it's hard. Like it takes an effort because I mean, you've lived abroad. Like you're not practicing. Like it's really easy to forget.
Yep.
Right.
Cool. All right. This one is about the, I guess, what do you call it in Georgia? Detention center?
Detention center. Yeah.
So why were they in there? Were any laws broken?
So yes and no. For some of the guys, they had like expired visas, for example. And so a lot of them get picked up from work. A lot of them work for like corporations and companies and things, and they'll get picked up at work because their paperwork isn't in order. So technically, that is illegal. A lot of them, however, have not broken a law. And I would like to say that one more time. A lot of those guys are in this detention center in the jumpsuits, can't have visits between a piece of glass, and they did not break a law. They followed the law. And by following the law, they came to a port of entry and they handed over their paperwork and said, I am surrendering myself for asylum. I would like you to process my case. And they were snatched up, plopped into a detention center where you and I pay for them to be there, $700 a day. And then their case will be tried. But of course, these guys don't have access to lawyers, so most of them are deported. So yeah, I mean, it's really heartbreaking for a lot of them when they're like, I did what I was supposed to. I didn't try to sneak. Some of them do. Some of them see what happens when you follow the law, like, well, forget it. I'm just going to march across the border where there is no border checkpoint. So some of them do get picked up that way. But I'm like, well, it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, because people who followed the law and people who didn't follow the law are in this center together.
Hmm.
So yes and no.
How, I mean, I know you probably don't know the numbers off your head, but how how big is the facility? How many people are you think are in
Over
there?
2,000.
What?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the men's?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the men's nationwide.
Jeez.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, last question, Steph. Even as a volunteer, do you have to obtain special clearance at these detention centers?
To be like what the humanitarian visits that El Refugio sets up, you really don't. All you have to do is submit your driver's license a week in advance at a minimum, because you have to be processed and get clearance before you show up. But all it is just sending a copy of your driver's license. No, is that right? No, I lied. The driver's license is to get clearance to do classes that we're trying to do, which hasn't been approved yet. But just to visit, you send your date of birth and your name. And what they do is they basically kind of just keep you in their database. And then when you go, you show your ID to make sure it matches. And then you're pretty much set. But you do have to give them like a week or two to give you clearance. So it's not too bad to get clearance, but you have to be careful, because once you're there, a lot of shenanigans can take place. Like the time I waited 5 hours to meet with my guy. So you have to just go with like patience and with the understanding that you might wait 5 hours and then they might say, nah, he's not coming out. And you're like, well, okay. Like that's just the attitude you have to have, is that you've given it your all. So yeah, anybody can do it.
Well, we'll wrap up and let you get to sleep, because I know you are a very, very busy woman, it seems. But yeah, so we need to connect off stream as well, Steph, for sure.
For sure.
All right. So thank you so much for joining, and thank everybody for tuning in and watching. And we will see you guys next week. Yeah, I'll get to that. All right. Thanks, Steph. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon. And we're having you on again once we find out that you got your doctorate. Okay.
Oh, yes. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a good one.